Hey guys, Chris Peach here, and welcome to the Money Peach podcast. Hey, do you remember growing up learning how to handle money? Yeah, neither do I. So that's why we're here today, to make your money fun again. You know, we're going to talk about the principles in life that actually matter when it comes to managing your money in a way that works. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Money Peach podcast. Before we jump into another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast, I want to take a second to talk to you guys about my free live training event, Stop Living Paycheck to Paycheck and Just Live. Join me each week on this live webinar where I show you the 4-step system we use to go from living paycheck to paycheck to later paying off $52,000 in debt in only 7 months. And as a bonus for joining me on this live training, I'll be answering any questions you may have during the live Q&A session at the end. So head on over to moneypeach.com/webinar to get registered. And just like that, we are back with another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. This is episode 38. On the show today, I'm bringing on my good friend, John Gaston. Now, John is one of the most successful entrepreneurs I've ever met in my life. And the cool thing about John is he's super humble about it. About 2 years ago, I meet John. He tells me nothing. I know John for almost a whole year before I start peeling back some layers and figuring out who this guy is. And it is impressive to say the least. Now, John's not on social media. John doesn't have a website. John doesn't ever tell his story. His story is amazing. He's an entrepreneur who built his business from the ground up and was able to retire at 34 years old. John today helps me with my own business. We meet twice a month. He's my mentor, and he talks to me about all the ins and outs that you guys see in Money Peach. A lot of that comes from help from John. So without further ado, let me bring on my good friend, guest on the show, super successful entrepreneur, John Gaston. Alrighty, John, thank you so much for coming on the Money Peach podcast. I've been trying to get you on this podcast for a while. Our schedules just weren't lining up. Now we're sitting here in your house. It's beautiful. It's amazing. I'm so glad we're here doing this because I know that everyone listening to this is going to find a ton of value from this because honestly, I find a ton of value, not just from this interview today, but a couple months ago, I asked you if you would be my mentor because I look up to you, I respect you, not just for business purposes. We've talked about this before, but just you as a whole. I look at myself going, you know, if I could be something similar to a John Gaston, I'm going to do okay in life. So I always joke around. People are like, what's John Gaston like? And I say, you know, if you're not John Gaston, you should sign up to be John Gaston. So without further ado, though, I want to introduce you. So John, welcome to the Money Peach podcast. And so tell us a little bit about you. Are you married, kids, you know, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So thanks for having me on. This is awesome, by the way. I am 43 years old, going to turn 44 next month. I'm married to a wonderful woman named Tiffany. I've been married for over 17 years now. 3 kids, 2 girls and a son. 14, 13, and 8 is my son. Just over here living the daily life.
When I first met you, and tell me if you're okay with me telling the story. If not, we'll have to figure out how to edit this out later. So I first meet John at the gym, and it's probably a year, John, that we're working out together, you know, and you are just like a dude next door, you know, like all I know is you're a cool dude from the gym and we're working out together. And I remember I told you, I said, yeah, you know, my wife and I, we bought a boat. And for those of you listening, you're thinking, wait, Money Peach bought a boat? Yes, we saved up cash over time and we bought a boat. Okay. I always tell people, spend your money on whatever you want. Just don't borrow it. Spend your money. So Andrea and I saved up and we bought this boat. And you had asked me just kind of casually at the gym, where are you parking your boat at? And I said, oh, I'm parking it in my parents' backyard. And you're like, oh, you should park it in my garage. And I'm like, why does this guy want me to park my boat in his garage? I'm like, what was going on here? So there was a rainy day. It was raining like crazy one day. And I get a text message from you. And it was like, I bet you wish your boat was in my garage right now.
I remember.
Yeah. And I remember thinking like, I actually do wish my boat was in a garage right now. So, you know, you're so nice. I'm like, well, what's the monthly cost in this? And you kind of laughed me off like, dude, just bring your boat over here. There's no cost. So I drive my boat over here. And one of the things that impressed me the most right away was you had a story to tell and you didn't ever tell it. You had this, you've been retired since you were 34 years old. I want to talk about that in a minute. But so I show up to your house and you have this beautiful house, beautiful garage. You let me park here. And I remember I looked at you and I said, John, what the heck do you do? And right there, I remember it clicked in my head, like I've known this guy for a year and he's real low key. He's very humble. I knew right away, I'm like, this guy's different. This guy's not like the people you see, like the Kim Kardashians on TV and stuff. This guy I joke around, I say, he's the millionaire next door. I mean, he's the guy you read about in my favorite book that I talk about on this podcast a lot, The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley. By the way, we'll have links to that in the show notes. But anyway, so I remember you kind of laughed it off and you said, well, I've been retired since I was 34. And I'm like, all right, I want to learn more. So this is where we're going to start off. I want you to take me back. We've talked a lot. Take me back to 18 years old in Ohio working for your dad.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, my entire life, my dad owned his own business. And when I graduated high school, I was living in Florida at the time with my mom, and I moved back up to Ohio to go work for and with my dad. And, I wanted to learn his business and ultimately had the vision of taking it over and continuing to grow it. And one day I was standing out in the driveway with him. This has been a couple years, maybe 2.5 years after working, and I kept grilling my dad. I kept going after him about, hey, why can't we, or why aren't we, growing? Why aren't we going after new business? Why? We were in Dayton, Ohio, and I said, hey, just give me the go ahead and let me go to Columbus and see if we can expand there. And my dad was, at that time, was not keep it small and keep it all, but he definitely wanted to have control. He was really comfortable in his business and the money he was making and the success he was having. So he kind of chuckled at me and he says, well, gee, son, how much money do you want to make? And I looked at him dead in the face and I said, Dad, I want to make $100,000 this year. And he literally laughed at me. And I think I knew at that very moment that in order for me to achieve the level of success that I had dreamed of, or that I had sort of visioned in my mind, I was going to have to go do it on my own.
So you weren't telling your dad, hey, Dad, I want to go make $100 million or anything crazy. We're talking $100,000. This
Correct.
is not I would assume, even if you're in college, you're sitting there going, I would like to make $100,000. It's not like an unrealistic amount of money.
Correct.
Okay. So, and your dad, what does he tell you?
Well, yeah, once we had that quick conversation and he laughed at me, I just knew at that moment it wasn't going to work. I wasn't going to change his mind. He's happy. He's got his own thing going, and, I just had to accept it.
And you did accept it. And I want to move into the next chapter then. So there's so many stories of people out there that, either they stay in their jobs or they stay working for the family business because I think they want to leave. They have this idea that they should leave, but they don't leave, right? It's the whole thing of when you think you can do something, it's a lot easier to think it, but to actually take action and say, no, I'm out. That's a huge step. It's bigger than words. So what was that like when you decided to step away?
Gosh, if you think about leaving the security of the job that I had with my dad, knowing that I would always have a job, may not be the level of success that I want, but it was always something stable. That day when I left, I moved from Ohio to Arizona, and you know what? It was just a feeling of uncertainty. Like, am I really making the right decision? You always question that. Even though I've got these dreams, I've got this vision, there's still this massive uncertainty. Gosh, am I robbing Peter to pay Paul? Am I jumping from the frying pan into the fire? Definitely having those feelings were a big part of what I was thinking at the time.
What did that do with your relationship with your dad and his business when you decided to step away?
That's interesting. So my dad was actually pretty supportive. I remember talking to him, and it wasn't the next day. It was probably several months later. I called my dad on a Thursday afternoon and I said, hey, you want to meet for lunch tomorrow? And we met at a McDonald's in Huber Heights, Ohio. We're eating and talking, and I said, Dad, I'm moving. I'm going to Ohio, and I'm going to start a personal training company with Ben. At the time, he didn't say anything, but years after, when we were recalling that conversation, he said, you just had a look in your eye. I knew I was not going to change your mind. So I had to let you go. And he goes, you know what? It worked out.
It ended up working out. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. Okay, so working for your dad, and obviously we have talked before this interview started. You were telling me about you have, I guess, two people that you really, really look up to in your life, and you had mentioned your friend Ben, and you mentioned your dad. So you had said it was Ben's dad and your dad.
Correct.
What are some of the things that you learned, or that you still use today that you learned from, I would say, the two people that you look up to most?
So, good question. So when I was young, my parents divorced when I was 10 years old. So if you think about, the experiences I had, the two most successful people that I knew was my father, and it was my best friend's father, Ben, at the time. And they were both entrepreneurs. They both owned their own business. And I viewed them as, wow, they've got the deal. They've got their own business. They're controlling their own life. And I'm 12 years old thinking this, and I'm not really sure why I'm that young thinking this way. But anyway, that's what I viewed as success. And then I compile that with other experiences. For example, when my parents first got divorced, my mom not even being able to provide $3 so I can go skating with my buddies. So I had that experience, and I thought, man, that doesn't feel very good. So those two experiences combined pushed me in the same direction. A, I need to get there, and B, I don't ever want to feel this way again. And if I circle back and go to your question about what I learned most, probably if I really boil it down, the two most influential people are my mom and my dad for two different reasons. For my father, I learned at a very young age how to treat other people. I remember going back during the summers, going to my father's company picnics, and it was completely unsolicited. But I remember his employees, guys, girls, didn't matter. Every single time I'd come across one of them and have a conversation, every one of them, unsolicited, told me how awesome my dad was and how well he treated people and how well he treated them. And every one of them had a story about how my dad went out of their way. And one guy even told me that he would throw himself in front of a bus, to save my dad. So that was, that left an impact. It left an impression on me. And I thought, man, I need to learn how to duplicate this. So that was one experience, lessons that I've learned from my father. And then my mom always had this saying, it didn't matter what was going on in our lives or anything negative. My mom always said, that which does not kill us will only make us stronger. And she had this wonderful ability to always look at, find, and express, even in the most negative situations, the positive. How can we, what can we learn from this? Those are the lessons that I kind of grew up with, or the takeaways that I have from, my mom and my dad. And I think they're lifelong valuable lessons.
We're going to circle back to what you talked about your dad. So it's funny, I had said earlier that one of the things that I really, really respect, that what draws me to you is, being retired at 34 and living life on your terms as far as, how you live your life, that's a dream for everybody. But one of the things that really impressed me, and I was trying to say this as nicely as possible, was it's not all the things and that stuff, it's the way that you treat people. And so I would say if I had to name a few people in my life who are master relationship builders, it would be you.
I appreciate that.
So when you were talking about your dad and what he said at the company picnic, I just started smiling because I'm like, okay, now I see the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. You picked up exactly what your dad was doing, because I would say you ask any of your buddies that I'm friends with now as well, and they will all say like, oh, JG, that's what they call you. JG, that guy, he treats everybody great. I often wonder, does anybody not like this guy? He is nice to everybody. So you moved to Arizona, 18 years old?
At the time, 21.
Okay, so 21 years old, you moved to Arizona. And by the way, college education or street smarts?
I had a solid semester of community college.
Okay, so pay attention, people listening, because you're going to notice a lot of the very, very successful high-end producers on this podcast all kind of say the same thing. So I'm not against college, but I think that if you lean on it too hard, you're going to be disappointed. So we have a solid semester of community college, right?
Yep.
You come to Arizona, and I remember one of the first times we sat down to talk about my business and you helping me, you shared the story, and it rocked my world. I was like, wow. And I know listening, pay very, very close attention to what he's about to say, because it rocked my world, and I know it's going to rock your world as well. So I want you to talk about opening up that first, so you're in personal training, but that first LA Fitness you got into. Okay. So take me to that first store before the store even opened. You told me the story.
Yeah. So my role at the time was to be the general manager of the training department. And the key role of that was signing up people that had just joined the gym, taking them through an introductory consultation, and closing them or getting people to sign up for personal training. The only challenge at the time was I didn't know how to sell. I didn't know what selling meant. I didn't understand the art of closing questions or leading people or getting people excited or transference of feeling. So I had to read. I had to learn how to do it all from a tape series. And the tape series that I'm talking about is called Psychology of Selling by Brian Tracy. And I didn't just learn how to sell in that tape series. I also learned a couple of other valuable questions or valuable thoughts as well. One of the takeaways was the most successful salespeople and the most successful leaders in the world, what they read. They read for like 15 minutes every single day. They read books on sales. They read books on leadership, on personal development. And I remember this one point that hit me hard was Brian Tracy all but guaranteed that if you read for 15 minutes every single day some type of leadership, personal development, or sales, you will double your income that year. I thought, oh man, this is it. I've got to start doing this. And I'll be darned if I didn't start reading for 15 minutes every day. And back in 1996, I doubled my income, more than doubled my income from 95.
What books were you reading?
Definitely Psychology of Selling. I got that book as well. The first personal development book that I had ever gotten or read was Think and Grow Rich
by Napoleon Hill.
Napoleon Hill. Mm-hmm. That book made a huge impression on me as well. And it's not just reading the books. It's not just reading it, putting it down. It's implementing the ideas and seeing the little ideas and little takeaways that you get from these books and implementing them into your daily life, your daily conversations, and you start seeing, wow, they work, or you start seeing a reaction from a person, or you start seeing a little bit of success, and it gets you to buy in more and more. And it's almost like this flywheel. And, once you get that flywheel going, you don't have to put in as much effort as you did in the beginning.
Tell me about your University on Wheels.
Yeah, University on Wheels. It goes back to Brian Tracy. That was the other concept that I took away was, in addition to reading for 15 minutes every day, he also talked about turning your vehicle into a University on Wheels. That just meant same thing was leadership, personal development, or sales, listening to tapes, listening to audios. And I did that Monday through Friday. Anytime that I was in the car from 8 a.m. on Monday to 5 or 6 or 8 p.m. on Friday, I was listening. I wasn't listening to the radio. I wasn't listening to music. It was really just more about taking that time that you were driving and not wasting it. It was learning.
So you had told me that turn your truck into a University on Wheels, and I'm a fireman. I'm a full-time firefighter, and I'm growing a business here. And so I don't know the first thing about growing a business. I'm basically starting where you were at 21, and I'm trying to use you as my stepping stone for let's skip all the bad habits and let's just go right to the good habits. And you said,
correct.
What I want you to do is I want you to turn your turn your truck into a University on Wheels. So I went and got an audiobook, and now I drive around and my friends think I'm crazy because I'm listening to nonstop audiobooks. But one of the things that inside one of the audiobooks was Zig Ziglar was talking about this, and Zig Ziglar's timeless. I mean, this is from the 1970s he said this. And he said USC did a study, University of Southern California does a study. He said that if you listen in LA traffic, okay, LA traffic's probably the worst in the country, one of the worst. But if you sit in traffic Monday through Friday and you drive an hour to work and an hour from work and you listen to books on tape or what you're talking about, and you do this for 1 year, you're going to get equivalent to a 2-year college education at USC. And I thought, oh my gosh, John had told me to turn my truck into University on Wheels. I did. And then this audiobook I'm listening to tells me that I'm getting a 2-year college education.
I remember reading that and listening to that from Zig as well.
And I'm thinking, this is amazing. Like what John is telling me is working. So you're learning, and so you're getting leads, right? You're getting leads for personal training at LA Fitness.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things was remarkable is you had told me how many leads you got and how you filled your day up. I think it was 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Yes.
Tell me about day one.
So the grand opening of the club, 2 weeks before that, I had gone into the club. It was still being buttoned up with construction and things like that.
Which club was it?
It was the LA Fitness on 55th Avenue in Bell, the Arrowhead location.
In the Phoenix area, Glendale area.
Correct.
Okay.
But anyway, 2 weeks before, I was excited. I did what any good salesperson is going to, was supposed to do, and that's, get myself loaded up with leads. So I did that, and I got myself, I called as many members as I could, get a hold of. And I was booked solid from 8 a.m. in the morning till 8 p.m. at night, probably for the first 2 weeks doing introductory consultations. And I remember as we're leading up to the opening day, I'm trying to polish up my, sales presentation and, what closing questions am I going to ask and how many times am I going to ask them? And, oh, geez, what type of objections am I going to get? I'm trying to polish this up. And I'd never done a real presentation before. I'd never done any, real sales.
Did you practice with anybody?
I did a lot of role playing with Ben.
Okay, Ben's your business partner.
Ben is my business partner.
/ best friend.
And best friend, yeah. And I remember driving up and down Bell Road, and he'd be just grilling me, and I'm like, dude, this is just too much. I got to take smaller chunks. But anyway, so I was loaded up on day one, and usually in a sales situation, you don't have 100% show ratio. But that day I had 12 appointments, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and I'll be darned if all 12 didn't show up, and I didn't close one of them. I didn't close one.
Well, we call
Not
that
one.
We call that 0%.
That's over.
So, okay, so hold on. Let me just rewind here because I can relate to this. So you set up 12 appointments, and each appointment's an hour long.
Correct.
You do like, a half hour of training and then half hour of showing your program.
Yeah, so back then it was exactly that. We would do a half hour on the equipment and then time to go back to the office for the other half hour.
I'm sure anybody that's been to any gym before knows exactly what John's talking about. So you are driving home now after putting in a good day's work. Now this was really important for you to tell me this because I have been a firefighter since I was 22 years old. And all I've known so far is that if I show up to work and I put in hours, in 2 weeks I get a paycheck for those hours I put in. I had never been accustomed to putting in work and possibly not getting paid. Mm-hmm. And so when I first started my business, that was a rude awakening for me. So I want you to share, what's that like when you say OFR, that means you trained people for 12 hours and no one signed up for training.
That is correct.
What's that like driving home? What's going through your mind?
So, all the confidence that I had going in was completely wrung out of the whole opportunity. It brought back a lot of feelings of the uncertainty. Geez, am I doing this? Am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right path? Do I just suck at sales? I mean, there's a lot of things that are going through your mind, and none of them are really that good. It was very, very, very tough that night, and I had a little bit better day the next day, but it took me a while.
You went to work the next day.
Oh, yeah. And I had to. If you ask the question, why did I go back? Well, I had to put food on the table. It was the only thing I had going on at the time. But, it was something that I had to work at very, very hard. And I had to continue to read, and I had to continue to listen to those tapes and hone my skills, and any little thing that I could, pull out of those books and audios was, that I would try to use every single day.
So besides putting food on the table, I mean, you're a smart enough guy. You could have went and got a job somewhere that's going to pay you. So why did you stick with the sales? Why did you stick with this business? What was it that kept driving you? Because a lot of people would say, well, John, you go home and you go OFR. You might say, well, all right, I guess I'm not good at sales. I know I'm smart enough to go find a steady paycheck job where I'm going to put food on the table. So why didn't you do that?
Good question. I think the reason I didn't was because I knew in my heart of hearts that it wasn't going to lead me to my ultimate goal. I knew that I had to figure this out. And don't ask me why I knew that, but I knew that just going up to LA Fitness and being a front desk person was not going to take me to the vision or, help me accomplish the goals that I had set for myself. That's all.
Wow. So you're grinding out, you're pushing through. So day 2, you said it's better. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's go now, let's go 60 to 90 days into this process. How are things going?
Way better. I mean, it was again, you go back to the first day and one of the thoughts that I had was, gosh, I don't ever want to feel that way again. So I better figure this out. So yeah, I mean, 90 days in, everything's going a lot better, and it continues to get better.
That's cool. That's very cool. And the reason why I was drawing that out of you is because I know it's relatable, because when I first started my business, obviously if you listen to this podcast, I talk about my online program I have. In the very, very beginning, I created this program and I thought, okay, I'm just going to email everyone and tell you I have this program available, and everybody's going to be like, yeah, I want it. And day one, it was crickets. It was an offer.
Right.
And I'm thinking, that's not how I envisioned it in my head. What's going on here? I spent all this time developing this wonderful course and not one person is interested. And I don't know what it was either that kept me going. I think it was because I had this goal. And a lot of it, you know what a lot of it was? Is I had told so many people I was going to do this.
Yep.
And I wasn't, I guess my pride, but I wasn't going to let anybody tell me, told you so.
Public proclamation, very powerful.
So looking back, I don't know if I was glad I told people that I was going to do this, but it did push me to say, look, you said you were going to do it. Did you feel that with your dad or your friends that you had left the business to go do this, that you now owned it, you were going to do it?
That's a good question. I think that I think there was a part of me that, I made a statement to my father, and I told him that I was going to go out and be what I wanted to be, and failing at that moment or any part in that time was not an option. How much of that was the driving force? Is probably a significant percentage. Sure.
Okay. Fair enough. I just want to see if I felt alone or if you felt the same way. I think a lot of people out there, from what I'm hearing, I'll get emails from somebody and they'll say, I want to start a blog like you did, but I don't know where to start. And I'm like, well, I didn't go to blogging school, right? I just, I put myself out there, and I think that's important. I mean, even with this podcast, I've never done interview school.
Right.
Right. I just figure it out, Sometimes things work out really well and sometimes crickets. So let's fast forward a little bit now. You're working your business and it's starting to grow. What's going through your mind as you're growing this business and you're getting to this point where I remember you had told me during one of our meetings, you had said, you were like, wow, this is going very well. What's going through your mind during all this?
Well, if you think about the first 5 to 8 years of the business, I mean, when you're growing and trying to create stability in the business, I mean, every single decision that you make could be a decision that takes you further towards your goal, or it could be a decision that, puts you out on the street. And we had, a lot of ups and downs. We had great successes. We definitely had our pitfalls, but every single time that we had those pitfalls, you just have to figure a way to get past that and to fix and to avoid whatever caused that pitfall moving forward, learning from it.
So you started off in that one LA Fitness. Okay. Let's say 3 years later, how many LA Fitness had you expanded to?
So 3 years, believe it or not, it was only, it was only 5.
Okay. And then what about 3 years later?
So in 1999, we had 5 locations. We had 2 here in Arizona and 3 in Florida.
With those 5 locations, comfortable living?
Comfortable.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But then in 2000, we had built a good enough relationship with LA Fitness where they trusted us. They trusted the way we do business. And we grew from 5 locations to 50 locations.
In 1 year?
In 2000.
So that's a lot of growth.
Lots of growth.
What was that? What did that feel like growing that quick?
Oh, I mean, you're working. I don't even know if there was a feeling other than you're just grinding every single day. In my position, it was literally hiring, recruiting, training, and managing every single day, all day, every day.
So at that level, you went from back when you started at that first LA Fitness where you were in front of the customer and you were training them one-on-one, and then you were taking them and showing them what they could do with your program one-on-one, to now you're transitioning into you're training a replica of you.
Yeah. So I actually had a couple transitions. So back in the first location, I was in front of the customer selling the personal training programs. And then over time, you kind of pull yourself out of the day-to-day operation of the club, and then you're training other people how to be in front of the customer and to close deals and manage the training staff. And then by the time we got to 2000, I had transitioned even one step further, being that not only was I training the managers in the clubs, but I was also working with, people that we had promoted to be VPs who would oversee, multiple locations, anywhere from, 4 to 10 locations.
So you're building a pretty good sized structure in your business.
Correct.
Okay. So, and I'm leading you up to this moment here because there's another powerful moment you shared with me. So business is, can we say for you, business feels like it's booming?
Business was good.
Okay. So business is good. I think everything in life, what goes up must come down, right? You're going to have ups and downs no matter what it is. It could be work, it could be marriage, it could be relationships, it could be things with kids. It's not always good, right?
No.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be situations where what goes up must come down, right? And sometimes I think not you had taught me this, but what separates somebody from achieving their goal from somebody who doesn't achieve their goal is how they react when you hit that bump in the road.
Correct.
Or for you, it was a little more of a bump. So I wanted you to talk about that if you're okay with that.
Sure. So in, I guess it was 2003, at that point we had grown so fast. And as a result of growing, I mean, it was great, but as a result of growing, we didn't have a full infrastructure that could support all of the hiring, all the new people, all of the customers. It was good, but we didn't have the infrastructure and the policies to protect the company, or policies that would, govern the way managers acted, what they can and cannot say to our customers, and how to treat people and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, as a result of that, we had a situation that happened in San Diego, and we made the local news. And I'll cut out most of the details, but that resulted in us basically getting 2/3 of our company completely sawed off. LA Fitness was not happy, and they let us know that they were not happy.
So was it a phone call?
Correct.
You get a phone call in your mind. What's going through your mind when you realize, okay, you've spent so many hours, years, working your tail off to get to this point, and now you're getting this phone call that about 2/3 of everything that you've worked for is gone. Mm-hmm. How do you overcome that?
Well, my first thought was, holy crap, this is another one of those things that could put me on the street. But I don't know if there was no time, because it happened so fast. And I had to, at that time, what we were lucky enough to be left with was all of our operation in Georgia and all of the operation in Florida.
And you're in Phoenix.
I'm in Phoenix, and I was working out of the office at the time for the most part. But in order to sort of salvage those operations out there and let, kind of calm everybody, that's a very big blow when, you get half your company sawed off. Everybody else who's still there thinks it's just a matter of time. I better start looking for another job. So the first thing that I did is I packed up, my wife and one daughter at the time. Tiffany was pregnant. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. Perfect timing. Yeah, absolutely. So I went out there, searched for a place to live, found one, and moved everybody else out right away. And my whole goal was to make it a calming situation for everybody. I wanted to wave the proverbial, company sword and just get back to doing business. And it was a speed bump, and it was a huge one, but I needed to minimize that speed bump as much as I could, get back to doing what we did best, which was providing a great service to the members at LA Fitness and continuing to drive sales.
I was trying, when you were telling me the story, I was relating it, going, okay, how could I relate this? I don't have a company that kind of size or anything like that. So I was thinking, if I had invested, say, $10,000 and things are going well, and I get a phone call from my planner and he says, by the way, Chris, we just lost 2/3 of your money. It's gone forever. Mm-hmm. That would put me in a panic mode. Mm-hmm. I'm impressed with how you just reacted to it. Like you said, I guess there was no time, but I didn't even add the factor that I had a wife that's 8 months pregnant, a kid, and I'm the sole provider to put food on the table. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is I want you guys listening to this to kind of put yourself in those shoes. Put yourself in the shoes that you've just worked an incredible amount of time, energy. You can imagine the amount, for those of you who are entrepreneurs, how hard it is to go through the ups and downs to build your business up to a level that John has. And one day, one moment, you get a phone call, and it's always at the worst time. And so you get a phone call saying 2/3 of your business is gone. 2/3 of everything you work for is gone. No fault of your own, or it could be, however you look at it. And by the way, your wife's pregnant. She's due in a month. You have a daughter, and the business you have here in Phoenix is gone, so you need to move. Mm-hmm. That would break a lot of people. I would say that would break most people. That's why I asked you to be my mentor.
I appreciate that.
That might break me. I might say, all right, I'm out. Okay. Now, this is where the story gets good, because I think a lot of times people look at you and say, oh, John Gaston, he lucked out, man. He's an overnight success. So let's talk about these next few years of being in Georgia and Florida, and what does that look like as far as work?
So, when I first get to Georgia, I mean, my life completely changed because, at the time I was kind of cushy, prior to losing 2/3 of the company. I was, up in the office, cushy, wasn't dealing with people, the managers and the VPs day to day. But that's what I had to do differently in Georgia was, be out there with everyone, grinding, doing ride-alongs, being in the clubs, helping out any way that I could. And I was traveling to Florida probably every other week and just doing what needed to be done to get everything moving forward.
What was that like on your family life with you now becoming a full-time traveler?
I think, I don't think the real full-time, like when we were just in Georgia, Florida, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't until a couple of years later where I had continued to keep a great relationship with one of the principals at LA. And it wasn't more than a year or two later where, we had kind of turned our company around and LA Fitness was interested in growing with us again. So I would say that it wasn't until 2005 that I really started traveling, but that was a result of us going back into the Northeast, Pennsylvania and New York. We were in Texas. We were back in Arizona, back in California. I mean, we were operating from 30 or 40 back into 150 locations within maybe a year.
So during that time, was it 30, 40 hours a week?
Oh, no.
No.
Oh, no. No, and it got so bad or got so intense that I would be gone from the house in the clubs 50, 60 hours a week. But that's not the bad part. The bad part is even when I was home, I wasn't necessarily home. I was still on the phone, checking numbers, I wasn't available physically or emotionally to Tiffany or the kids.
Are you tired of living paycheck to paycheck? Are you lying in bed awake at night wondering how you're going to pay the next bill? How you're going to save for kids' college? How you're going to pay off that debt? And when are you going to take that dream vacation that you guys have been talking about forever? Well, stop worrying about it and head on over to awesomemoneycourse.com and see why students all over the world are now taking back control of their money. They're now in the driver's seat of their financial future. awesomemoneycourse.com. awesomemoneycourse.com. Did you ever feel like there was a moment when you were trying to regrow this to where you were, that you were living to work instead of working to live?
I never really felt that way. I just had this goal. And I was just working to the goal, and I felt like, and I know that success is not necessarily a destination; it's more of a journey. I get that, but at the time, I had to get to a certain level before I could mentally relax. And in my mind, it was for myself, it was for Tiffany, it was for the kids, it was getting this done today, so that I didn't have to do anything in the future. And I'll tell you, I'll go back. One of the other concepts I learned when I was 20 years old was the concept of cramming 40 years of work into 20. And I went to this development seminar, and guys up on stage saying, "Hey, if you're 20 years old, you're basically like zero. You're not 20, you're zero. And what you need to do, your working life doesn't start at zero, it starts at 20 years old. So how do you most people are going to, have their working career from 20 to 60. And he says the idea of being successful is cramming 40 years of work into 20. And if you're really extra bright, you can figure it out in 15. So that was sort of a concept I had in my mind too, as I was going through and, those tough days, the long days, the sacrifices that I was making with Tiffany and the kids. It was all for the greater good. It was about doing all the things that most people weren't willing to do today, so that I didn't have to do them tomorrow. Gotcha. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So then the question I have off that is, now that you've took that advice and you went through that process, if you could repeat it all again, would you repeat it, or would you do things differently?
To live the life that I live today?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Perfect. I love it. All right. So we talked about rebuilding the business. So you rebuild it to the level you were at or better?
Oh, bigger.
Bigger. So having that hiccup actually caused you to move even further ahead than you thought possible?
So that's a really good point as well. I would, at the time you're going through that, you're saying, man, this is the worst thing that could possibly happen at this moment in time.
The only thing that could have been worse is if you came home and said, our company's gone and your wife gave birth right there. I think that would have been worse.
That'd have been worse.
Yeah.
But, looking back after we had gotten a few years down the road and had regained the level of success plus, and knowing the direction that the company was headed, you look back and I think all of us agreed, all the guys that were there, with us going through that pitfall, they all agreed that was probably the best thing that ever happened to us because it forced us to reinvent ourselves and to just do things better.
I've been taught this, and I don't know if you've ever been taught this, but I don't know where I learned it from. Maybe my dad, but pain is a great motivator.
Correct.
And so I've learned that in the gym. I've learned that by, going to college. I learned that when I walked onto the wrestling team. I was never given a scholarship, so I had to walk on, and it was that pain that caused me to keep moving forward.
Yep.
And so one of the relatable things when you were sharing that story with me is I was like, he went through this pretty rough period, and it motivated him to go beyond that. So now the question is, if you could go back in time, would you change that from happening to you? If you can go back and say, I could erase that moment from San Diego, would you erase it or would you keep it?
I don't know if we would have made the appropriate and required changes to our business without having gone through that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I think had we not gone through that, we'd have continued to cruise and maybe relax, if you will, and not continually find or even know how to improve. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So you had to go through that experience and that pain in order to find a better way and to find more success.
It's like there's a podcast I listen to called Jocko. I don't know if you ever heard of him. And so he is a Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL, and his podcast, he has every word he says is good. And what I mean by that is, you lost your job? Good. Now you go get a better one. Oh, you got in a fight with your wife? Good. Now you know what not to fight about. Everything is good. You got your business 2/3 taken away from you. Good. Now you know what not to do so you can grow it even bigger. And so I kind of relate that to your story as good. That happened. Look where it took you to. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's fast forward. Things are building. Things are going well. Take me to your retirement day, 34 years old.
That day was pretty surreal. If we talk just specifically about that day, I mean, it's the accumulation of, 13 years of hard work, dedication, blood, sweat, and tears. And here I am in this conference room that has a conference table. It's probably 30 feet long.
At LA Fitness?
Might have been, it was either at LA Fitness's office or their attorney's office. Anyway, we had our attorney, and it was Ben and myself, and it was literally all the way around the perimeter of this conference room table. It was document after document after document after document that we had to sign. You get done doing all that stuff. Ben and I walk out and we know that there's going to be deposits coming, and we're like, wow, this is it. We did this.
Your dream.
It's crazy. Like it's an unreal, surreal feeling.
So from age, what you were 21 years old when you left your dad's company.
Correct.
And 34. So
13 years.
13 years later, and that vision you had is now here. It's done.
Yes.
And so you're signing those papers, you walk out, and the cool thing is, and this is what's really unique about, I think, with you building relationships, is most stories you hear when people start a business with their best friend or their family member don't turn out great.
Oh, I know. Ben and I are lucky.
Well, I think it goes back to your relationship, the way you treat people.
Yes.
I've never met Ben, so I don't know Ben at all, but I could tell you that you're very open-minded.
Yes. I'm going to put the question in, from you to me. So how do you keep a partnership going for that long? And I get asked that question a lot. I get asked, how do you and Ben do it? Because I run into friends or people that have businesses, that partners, and they just, fall apart miserably. So everybody's curious. And personally, I don't know a whole lot of business partners that make it as long as Ben and I have. But if I were to tie it all together and give one explanation as to why we were able to make it work, and it's far beyond him being married to my sister, far beyond us being best buddies. It really comes down to, hey, we are going to have disagreements. we are going to view things differently, but we're never going to make it personal. The minute we, make any argument personal or any disagreement personal, that's when the damage starts. I think the way that our relationship and our arrangement was dictated that, one person would have the final say, and we just never let it get personal. We never screamed at each other. We never made personal comments or said anything negative about each other personally. And that ill will or that, relationship damage never came into play.
That's impressive. I mean, that is extremely impressive. I'd say that's one of the few times I've heard this. So on episode 33 of the Money Peach podcast, I brought on Nate Adams. And Nate had started a business with his friends at age 21 years old. They started a glove company, and it didn't go work out well. It cost him about $150,000, and he lost 2 friends out of it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the common thing you hear. And then you're such a unique story because you guys have been friends since how old?
We were 9 when we...
9 years old. Mm-hmm. You guys go off on your own to a state where, did you know anybody here?
Nope.
Okay, so you go to Arizona from Ohio, don't know anybody. You guys grow this business. You go through a major, speed bump, as you put it, and then you regrow it. It's kind of a full circle, if you will, because you're sitting in that 30-foot long table, signing these papers, which in essence represent you've reached the pinnacle point that you've had in your mind. Mm-hmm. And so that 34-year-old thing, that's, I'm 33, 34 next month. By the way, April 16th is my birthday, if anybody cares. So.
April 24th is mine.
Very cool. Very cool. Anyhow, yeah, we're just at this point now where I'm like, wow, John, 13 years of grinding, of ups and downs, of working with a business partner. You basically, for me, everything I've been taught tells me that you shouldn't have succeeded, because most people would have gotten an argument or a fight or a falling out with their best friend. Most people would have had 2/3 of the company pulled away and said, I'm done. Most people would have never left their dad's company. Most people at age 21 would never have traveled across the country to a place they didn't know without a sales background and start selling. So, hats off to you. It's pretty remarkable.
Appreciate that.
For a community college education. And I go back to that by saying, college is important, but don't lean super hard on it, because the last couple entrepreneurs we've had on the show, semester and they were out. And I think they get most of their knowledge by having to go out there and work for it.
School of Hard Knocks.
School of Hard Knocks. All right. Now let's transition into, we're coming up towards the end here. So let's transition to, you are now retired, 34 years old.
Okay.
One of the things you had shared with me, and I think it was powerful for me to hear this, because I want to be proactive in my life. I want to retire early as well, but I don't want to make mistakes, and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm trying to avoid them as possible. What are some of the things you didn't see coming when you became retired at 34, some of the struggles you saw?
So from a business perspective, there's a few different, angles that I'll talk about, but from a business perspective, when we got bought out and we were done, at the same time, we've really felt like, because of the experiences that we've had and the different types of people that we had to lead and navigating all of the, pitfalls, we, for lack of a better term, we kind of thought our didn't stink, and thought that, anything that we touched was going to turn to gold. And that is a huge misconception. Just because you have money to throw at any endeavor doesn't guarantee success. And I learned that the hard way as well. Had some pretty significant investments right out of the gate, and both of them failed miserably. It brought me back to, after going through that experience, it really, I started reminding myself, gosh, startups are hard. Starting a business is not easy. Early on, those decisions that you make are life and death, because you don't have any cushion. You don't have any momentum. There's no platform there for you to fall back on. Everything that you're doing is just kind of chucking stuff on the wall, and you want it to work, you think it'll work, but sometimes it doesn't. That was a big misconception. I thought, hey, my experience, the financial resources that I have, anything that I do is going to work, and that's wrong.
Okay. So So now when you say you throw a substantial amount of money, are you talking about like breaking the bank amount or enough to sting real bad?
Oh, no. Okay. So that's a great point as well. Yes, it is a substantial amount of money, but anything that I was investing into was never going to change my life. So it was a small percentage of what the total portfolio was, if you will.
Sure. And the reason why I ask you that, we talked about this before we had started this conversation, but I want people to understand that I don't care about the numbers. Okay, everybody's in a different situation,
Sure.
right? We live in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. So I'll give you an example. $100,000 over here in Phoenix, Arizona, is different than $100,000 in San Francisco,
Correct.
and it's different than $100,000 in South Dakota. Okay, so I don't care about the numbers, and that's one of the things that we've talked about before. Is the numbers don't really matter. It's about the ratios, the percentages. You know. So what would you say is the best part of you building up substantial wealth?
Freedom.
What do you mean by freedom? Expound on that.
So this is probably the good and the bad.
Okay. Well, that's the next question, so that's perfect.
So the freedom part is knowing that, you can literally wake up and kind of do whatever it is that you want to do. The finances are not an issue anymore. I've got time, which is awesome because I have kids that are growing up, and I have the greatest relationship with my wife now that I've ever had. And that's all. It just gives you this peace of mind and freedom to know that you can kind of do what you want. On the other hand, the negative side of it is you have to keep your mind busy. You have to engage in something, be passionate about something. And I find myself, from time to time going, waking up in the morning and I'm like, gosh, what am I going to do today? Like, what's my purpose? What am I working for now? What's my next goal? And, sometimes you got to manufacture it. You got to manufacture engagement. You got to manufacture passion. And I would say that's probably the negative side. If you choose not to do that, you can find yourself feeling pretty empty.
What about your relationships? What have you learned about when you build substantial wealth? Because I think people listening to this podcast, they're in different situations. They want to either get out of debt or they're debt-free and they want to start building substantial wealth. I always want them to have the end game in mind. So with you, I would say you have a lot of our end games in our minds as you're living right now, which is why I'm asking this question. But what about with relationships? Have you noticed any superficial or struggles with people that you've met over the years when they find out who John Gaston is?
Oh, absolutely. And, going back to the first times that we had met in the gym when I had started there, so everything that you described about, you having no idea until a year later when you came to my house, it was my intention to just be one of the guys. I just wanted to cut it up. I wanted to work hard in the gym. I didn't want anything given to me. I wanted to make friends just for John, because I'd had that experience where, people find out you got money. Now all of a sudden, they're asking for this, that, and the other, and kind of taking the relationship for granted. This happened to me many, many times. Probably unfortunately for me, I give into it too much. So anytime I can help out a family member or a friend, I'm probably kind of a sucker for it. But having been tired or gotten tired of that, my intention when I went to the gym was to just be one of the guys.
That you were. I mean, like I said, a whole year goes by. I'm like, this guy, John, just gets it on in the gym. For the record here, I just want everyone to know his nickname in the gym. Go ahead and tell him your nickname.
Silver Fox.
Why they call you the Silver Fox?
Because I have this most beautiful silver hair.
And how long have you had it?
Oh my gosh. I probably started turning gray when I was late 20s. Mid 30s, I'm kind of salt and pepper. And
I bet you, John,
now
if we go back, we could find the moment you started turning gray was the San Diego moment.
You're probably right about that.
That might be, so we'll call it the San Diego Silver Fox. Alrighty, so one of the things we always mention in this podcast, or we have been mentioning, I shouldn't say we always mention, we have been mentioning is, so we talked a little bit about, you just mentioned a little bit, but what is your take on generosity?
From just giving back?
Any way you want to talk about it. I've had people say, generosity to them means tithing 10%. I've had people say generosity is whenever they feel about it. I want to kind of transition into maybe talk about one of the organizations you're real passionate about as well, because I know there's one of them.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been able to do as a result of the life that I live is to give back. And my wife is on the board of the John J. and Rich Love Up. They support Love Up Charity, and they support foster kids in and throughout Arizona. She spends a lot of time being on the board of that. The other thing that we do is we do go to a lot of charity events, and we do participate, and that has been pretty fulfilling, and had a lot of fun doing it as well.
Sure. I was really thankful to have you. I sit on the board for the Hunter Club of Arizona, which supports public safety, fallen officers, fallen firefighters, border patrol agents, anybody like that in Arizona. You came and supported us with that. But now that you are retired, do you feel the reason why I'm asking you this is one of the things I had learned when I was reading about personal finance, when I was reading about money, is, I was never taught anything about money. So I went through the School of Hard Knocks too. Andrew and I went completely broke in 2011, nothing, $0 in the bank. And I remember reading all these stories, and in my mind, I kept thinking, I got to get out of debt, and I got to get money. I got to get out of debt, I got to get money. And there was this common theme I kept reading that talked about giving money away. And I'm like, what are these people talking about? I don't have any money. And they're talking about giving it away. And now fast forward, Andrew and I have been debt free for 6 years now. And every month we set aside a certain amount of money that we're going to give away. I'm telling you, the most fun that I've had personally with money is being able to give it away.
Sure.
Do you feel that same way?
I've had a great time giving money away. I don't know if the idea of giving money away to receive more is the thing that I think about, but it's definitely something that we've been passionate about. It's not just about giving money away. It's also about giving your time away. And we've been really fortunate to be in positions where we can do that. And like I said, we've had a lot of fun doing it.
Well, apparently you're able to spend about 3 hours every 2 weeks with me. Yeah, so that's giving. All right, so I'm going to hit you with this last question here before we wrap up. Knowing what you know now about life and about money and about what you've learned over the last, 20 years of being in business, doing what you've done, what's one of the biggest takeaways? If you had to put, a takeaway out there, what's one of the biggest takeaways? What would you tell people about what you've learned over the last 20 years of business, of relationships and everything?
I would say educate yourself in the business or area of work that you are working in and want to grow in. And this is so simple, but never quit, because you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. As long as you never quit, you'll find success.
One of the takeaways you had told me at our last meeting when we sat down, you probably don't even remember this. You said, Chris, the biggest separator between people who do sort of good and generate substantial wealth is the people that did generate substantial wealth, they didn't give up.
Correct.
And sometimes they got to go through hell.
Correct.
And so I remember hearing that because I had come off a whammy, and I remember sharing that with you, and you're like, yeah.
Yep.
Welcome to business. Welcome to being an entrepreneur.
And think about this. Think about the concept of, water boils at 212 degrees. Think of the amount of entrepreneurs out there that get their water boiling to 210 or 211 degrees and quit. They were 1 degree away from getting that water to boil. And that is why I say don't quit.
Okay. Yeah. You just sparked my memory. Another thing that you had taught me, and I want you to talk about this before we wrap up. I know we're at the very end here, but you had said, Chris, if you can get 1% better every day, and I'm going to have you finish the rest.
Yeah. So one of the things I used to talk about with our, managers, and especially during times when they were dealing with frustrations, maybe going through a dry spell or just having a rough time at, their job, I always used to remind them of, hey, your goal is to get better by 1% every single day. And I would wait for them to respond to me. And the cross-eyed look that they would get is, gosh, that doesn't really sound like a lot. 1% every day, that's not very much. Then I would go forward and I would say, yes, but if you get better by 1% every single day over a period of 12 months, you will be better by 365%. And that is a substantial improvement.
Going back to what you said earlier, doubling your income.
Absolutely. And, you would instantly see that simple little talk, the light bulb would go off, and it's impactful.
So you had told me that in January, and we're recording this March 29th, 2017 is when we did this interview. And I've taken that, and every single day now that I do even a little bit inside of my business, I'm like, you know what, that was 1% better. Mm-hmm. And some days it maybe be 5% better. Some days might be 2% or 10%, but at least 1%. Mm-hmm. And I look back to when you had first told me that in January, and I went and I looked at my income, and I'm like, wow, my income has grown. And it's the truth, 1%. I wasn't shooting for 20% the first day. It was just 1%. And one of the things, the reason why I wanted to bring that up before we end here is I want you to think that 1% is not a crazy amount of effort. It's consistent effort. And if you can do 1% every day, which I think is very doable, mm-hmm. I think average can do 1%. I think above average can do 2 to 3%.
Absolutely.
So if you can just do average 1% every single day, you're talking to a firefighter who drives a fire truck here. And I've been taking this 1% every day, and it's been extremely powerful. Extremely powerful. And so I'm glad that you shared that with me. All right. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Look forward to maybe hearing you again a year down the road on the show.
I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for tuning in to another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. All the show notes, anything that John and I talked about in the show can be found at moneypeach.com/session38. That's moneypeach.com/session38. Tune in next week for another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. Take care. Boom,